The Adventure of the Three Students. It was in the year 95 that the combination of events into which I need not enter caused Mr. Sherlock Holmes and myself to spend some weeks in one of our great university towns, and it was during this time that the small but instructive adventure which I am about to relate befell us. It will be obvious that any details which would help the reader to exactly identify the college or the criminal would be injudicious and offensive. So painful a scandal may well be allowed to die out. With due discretion, and incident itself, however, may be described, since it serves to illustrate some of those qualities for which my friend was remarkable. I will endeavor in my statement to avoid such terms as would serve to limit the events to any particular place, and give a clue as to the people concerned. We were residing at the time in a furnished lodgings close to the library where Sherlock Holmes was pursuing some laborious researches in the early English charters. Researches which led to results so striking that they may be the subject of one of many future narratives. Here it is that one evening we received a visit from an acquaintance of mine, Mr. Hilton Soames, tutor and lecturer at the College of St. Luke's. Mr. Soames was a tall, spare man with a nervous kind and excitable temperament. I had always known him to be restless in his manner, but on this particular occasion he was in such a state of uncontrollable agitation that it was clear that something was very unusual had occurred. I trust, Mr. Holmes, that you will find spare a few hours of your valuable time. We have had a very painful incident at St. Luke's, and had really, but for the happy chance of your being in town, I should have been at a loss of what to do. I am very busy right now, and desire no distractions, my friend answered. I should much prefer that you called on the aid of the police. No, my dear sir, such a course is utterly impossible. When once the law is invoked, we cannot be stayed again. And this is just one of those cases where, for the credit of the college, it is most essential to avoid scandal. Your discretion is well known, as are your powers, and you're the one man in the world who can help me. I beg you, Mr. Holmes, to do what you can. My friend's temper had not improved since he had been deprived of the congenial surroundings of Baker Street. Without his scrapbooks, his chemicals, and his homely untidiness, he was an uncomfortable man. He shrugged his shoulders in ungracious acquiescence, while a visitor, in hurried words, with much excitable gesticulation, poured forth his story. I must explain to you, Mr. Holmes, that tomorrow is the first day of the examination for the Fortescue Scholarship. I am one of the examiners. My subject is Greek, and the first of the papers consists of a large passage of Greek translation which the candidate has not seen. This passage is printed on the examination paper, and it would naturally be an immense advantage if the candidate could prepare it in advance. For this reason, great care is taken to keep the paper secret. Today, about 3 o'clock, the proofs of this paper arrived from the printers, and the exercise consists of half a chapter of treatises. I had to read it over carefully, for the text must be absolutely correct. At 4:30, my task was not yet completed. I had, however, promised to take tea in the friend's room, and so I left the proof on my desk. I was absent rather more than an hour. You are aware, Mr. Holmes, that our college doors are double, the green glazed ones within, a heavy oak one without. As I approached the outer door, I was amazed to see a key in it. For an instant I imagined that I had left my own there, but on feeling it in my pocket I found that it was all right. The only duplicate which existed, so far as I knew, was that which belonged to my servant, Bannister, a man who looked after my room for 10 years, and whose honesty is absolutely above suspicion. I found that the key was indeed his, and that he had entered the room to know if I wanted tea, and that he had very carelessly left the key on the door when he came out. His key and his visit to my room must have been within a very few minutes of my leaving it. His forgetfulness about the key would have mattered little upon any other occasion, but on this one day it had produced the most deplorable of consequences. The moment I looked at my table, I was aware that someone had rummaged among my papers. The proof was in 3 long slips. I had left them all together. Now I found that one of them was lying on the floor, one of them on the side table near the window, and the third was where I had left it. Holmes stirred for the first time. The first page was on the floor, the second in the window, and the third was where you left it. Exactly, Mr. Holmes. You amaze me. How could you possibly know that? Pray continue with your very interesting statement. For an instant I imagined the Bannister had taken the unpardonable liberty of examining my papers. He denied it, however, with the utmost earnestness, and I am convinced that he was speaking the truth. The alternative was that someone passing had observed the key in the door and had known that I was out, and had entered to look at the papers. A large sum of money is at stake, for the scholarship is a very valuable one, and an unscrupulous man might very well run risk in order to gain an advantage over his fellows. Bannister was very much upset by the incident. He had nearly fainted when he found that the papers had undoubtedly been tampered with. I gave him a little brandy and left him collapsed in the chair while I made the most careful examination of the room. I soon saw that the intruder had left other traces of his presence. Besides the rumpled paper. On the table in the window were several shreds from a pencil which had been sharpened. A broken tip of lead was lying there also. Evidently the rascal had copied the paper in a great hurry, but had broken his pencil and had been compelled to put a fresh point on it. Excellent, said Holmes, who was recovering his good humor at his attention, became more engrossed with the case. Fortune has been your friend. That was not all. I have a new writing table with a fine surface of red leather. I was prepared to swear, and so was Bannister, that it was smooth and unstained. Now I found a clean cut on it about 3 inches long. Not a mere scratch, but a positive cut. Not only this, but the table I found a small ball of black dough or clay with specks of something that looked like sawdust in it. I am convinced that these marks were left by the man who rifled the papers. There are no footmarks, and no other evidence to be his identity. I was at my wit's end when suddenly this happy thought occurred to me that you were in town, and I came straight round to put the matter into your hands. Do help me, Mr. Holmes. You see my dilemma. Either I must find the man, or else the examination must be postponed until fresh papers can be prepared. And since this cannot be done without an explanation, there will ensue a hideous scandal, which will throw a cloud not only on the college, but on the university. Above all things, I desire to settle the matter quietly and discreetly. I shall be happy to look into it, and to give you such advice as I can, said Holmes, rising and putting on his overcoat. The case is not entirely devoid of interest. Had anyone visited you in your room after the papers came to you? Yes, young Delardras, an Indian student who lives in the same stair. He came in to ask me some particulars about the examination, for which he was ended. Yes? And the papers were on your table. To the best of my belief, they were rolled up, but might be recognized as proofs. Possibly. No one else in your room? No. Excuse me. Did anyone know that these proofs would be there? No one save the printer. Did this man Bannister know? Oh, certainly not. No one knew. Where's Bannister now? He was very ill, poor fellow. I left him collapsed in the chair. I was in such a hurry to come see you. You left your door open. I locked up the papers first. Then it amounts to this, Mrs. Holmes, that unless the Indian student recognized the roll as being proofs, the man who tampered with them then came upon them accidentally, without knowing that they were there. So it seems to me. Holmes gave an enigmatic smile. Well, he said, let us go round. Not one of your cases, Watson. Mental, not physical. All right, come in if you want. Now, Mrs. Holmes, at your disposal. The sitting room of our client opened by a long, low, latticed window on the ancient, lichen-tinted court of the old college. The Gothic arch door led to a worn stone staircase. On the ground floor was the tutor's room. Above were 3 students, one on each story. It was already twilight when we reached the scene of our problem. Holmes halted and looked earnestly at the window. Then he approached it, and standing on tiptoe with his neck craned, he looked into the room. He must have entered through the door. There is no opening except the one pane. As I learned a guide. Dear me, said Holmes, as he smiled, in a singular way that he glanced at our companion. Well, if there's nothing to be learned here, we had best go inside. The lecturer unlocked the outer door and ushered us into his room. We stood at the entrance while Holmes made an examination of the carpet. I'm afraid there are no signs here, said Holmes. One could hardly hope for any upon a dry day. Your servant seems to have quite recovered. You left him in the chair, you say? Which chair? By the window there. I see. Near this little table. You can come in now. I've finished by the carpet. Let us take a little table first. Of course, what has happened is very clear. The man entered to look at the papers, sheet by sheet, from the central table. He carried them over to the window table, because from there he could see if you came across the courtyard, and so could effect an escape. As a matter of fact, he could not, said Holmes, for I entered by the side door. Ah, that's good. Well, anyhow, that was in his mind. Let me see the 3 strips. No finger impressions, no. Well, he carried this over this one, and he copied it. How long would it take him to do that, using every possible contraction? A quarter of an hour, no less. Then he tossed it down and seized the next. He was in the midst of that when your return caused him to make a hurried retreat. Very hurried. Since he had not time to replace the papers, which would tell you that he had been there. You were not aware of any hurrying feet on the stairs as you entered the outer door? No, I can't say I was. Well, he wrote so furiously that he broke his pencil, and had, as you observe, to sharpen it again. This is of interest, Watson. The pencil was not an ordinary one. It is above the usual size with a soft lead. The outer color was dark blue, and the maker's name was printed in silver lettering, and the piece remaining is only about 1.5 inches long. Look at such a pencil, Mrs. Holmes, and you will have got your man. When I add that he possesses this large, very blunt knife, you have an additional aid. Mr. Soames was somewhat overwhelmed by this flood of information. I can follow the other points, he said, but really, in the matter of the length of his... Holmes held out a small chip with the letters NN, and a space of clear wood after them. You see? No, I fear that even now... Watson, I've always done you an injustice. There are others. What could this NN be? It is the end of a word. You are aware of the Johann Faber, the most common maker's name. It is not clear that there is such of a pencil left as usually follows by a John. He held a small table sideways and an electric light. I was hoping that if the paper on which he wrote was thin, some trace of it might be come through the polished surface. No, I see nothing. I don't see there's anything more to be learned here. Now for the central table. This small appendix, I presume. The black, doughy mass of which you spoke. Roughly pyramidal in shape and hollowed out, I perceive. As you say, there appear to be grains of sawdust on it. Dear me, this is most interesting. And a cut, a positive tear, you see. It began with a thin scratch and embedded in a jagged hole. I am much indebted to you for directing my attention to this case, Mr. Soames. Where does this door lead to?
My bedroom.
Have you been in it since your adventure?
No, I came straight away for you.
I should like to have a chance and a glance to look around. What a charming old-fashioned room. Perhaps you will kindly wait a minute until I have examined the floor. No, I see nothing. What about this curtain? You hang your clothes behind it. If anyone were forced to conceal himself in this room, he must do it there, since the bed is too low and the wardrobe too shallow. No one there, I suppose.
Holmes drew the curtain. I was aware, from some little rigidity and alertness of his attitude, that he was prepared for an emergency. As a matter of fact, the drawn curtain disclosed nothing but 3 or 4 suits of clothes hanging from a line of pegs. Holmes turned away and stooped suddenly to the floor.
"Hello, what's this?" he said.
It was a small pyramid of black, putty-like stuff, exactly like the one upon the table in the study. Holmes held it in the open palm, with the glare of an electric light.
Your visitor seems to have left traces in your bedroom, as well as in your sitting room, Mr. Soames.
What could he have wanted here?
I think it is clear enough. You came back by an unexpected way, so he heard no warning until you were at the very door. What could he do? He caught up everything he could and would betray himself, and he rushed into your bedroom to conceal.
Good gracious, Mr. Holmes, do you mean to tell me that all the time I was talking to Bannister, in this room, we had the man prisoner as if we had known it?
So I read it.
Surely there's another alternative, Mr. Holmes. I don't know whether you observed my bedroom window.
Lattice paned, lead framework. 3 separate windows, one swinging in on a hinge and large enough to admit a man.
Exactly. And it looks out at an angle of the courtyard which is partly invisible. The man might have effected his entrance there, left traces as he passed through the bedroom, and finally, finding the door open, have escaped that way. Holmes shook his head impatiently.
Let us be practical, he said. I understand that you say that there are 3 students who use this stair and are in the habit of passing by your door.
Yes, there are.
And they are all in for this examination.
Yes.
Have you any reason to suspect any one of them more than the others?
Soames hesitated. It is a very delicate question, said he. One hardly likes to throw suspicion where there are no proofs.
Let us hear the suspicions. I will look after the proofs.
I will tell you, then, in a few words, the character of the 3 men who inhabit these rooms. The lower of the 3 is Gilchrist, a fine scholar and athlete. Plays in the rugby team and the cricket team for the college. He got his blue for the hurdles and the long jump. He is a fine, manly fellow. His father was a notorious Sir Jabez Gilchrist, who ruined himself on the turf. My scholar has been left so very poor, but it is hard-working and industrious. He will do well. The 2nd floor is inhabited by the Dulat's Ras, the Indian. He is a quiet, inscrutable fellow, and most of those Indians are. He is well up for his work, though his Greek has been his weak subject. He is steady and methodical. The top floor belongs to Miles McLaren. He is a brilliant fellow when he chooses to work, one of the brightest intellects in the university, but he is wayward, dissipated, and unprincipled. He was nearly expelled over a card scandal in his first year. He has been idling all this term, and he must look forward with dread to the examination.
And then it is he whom you suspect.
I dare not go so far to say that, but of the three he is perhaps the least unlikely.
Exactly. Now, Mr. Holmes, let us have a look at your servant Bannister.
He was a little white-faced, clean-shaven, grizzle-haired fellow of 50. He was still suffering from a sudden disturbance of the quiet routine of his life. His plump face was twitching with all his nervousness, and his fingers could not keep still.
"We're investigating this unhappy business, Bannister," said his master. "Yes, sir." "I understand," said Holmes, "that you left your key in the door."
Yes, sir."
"Was it not very extraordinary that you should do this on the very day where these papers were inside?"
"It was most unfortunate, sir, but I have occasionally done the same thing at other times."
"When did you enter the room?"
"It was 4:30. That's Mrs. Soames' tea time."
"How long did you stay?"
"When I saw that he was absent, I withdrew at once."
"Did you look at these papers on the table?"
"No, sir, certainly not."
"How came you to leave the key in the door?"
"I had a tea tray in my hand. I thought I would come back for the key, then I forgot."
"Has the outer door a spring lock?"
"No, sir."
"Then it was open all the time."
"Yes, sir."
"Anyone in the room could get in and out?"
"Yes, sir."
"When Mr. Soames returned and called for you, you were much disturbed."
"Yes, sir. Such a thing has never happened during the many years that I have been here. I nearly fainted, sir."
"I understand. Where were you when you began to feel bad?"
"Where was I, sir?" "Why, here, near the door."
"That is singular, because you sat down in the chair over yonder in the corner. Why did you pass these other chairs?"
"I don't know, sir. It didn't matter to me where I sat down."
"I really don't think he knew much about Mr. Holmes. He was looking very bad, quite ghastly." "You stayed here when your master left?"
"Only for a minute or so, then I locked the door and went to my room."
"Whom do you suspect?"
"Oh, I would not venture to say, sir. I don't believe there's any gentleman in the university who is capable of profiting by such an action. No, sir, I'll not believe it."
"Thank you. That will do," said Holmes. "Oh, one more word. You have not mentioned to any of the three gentlemen whom you attend that anything is amiss."
"No, sir, not a word."
"You haven't seen any of them?"
"No, sir."
"Very good. Now, Mr. Holmes, we will take a walk to the quadrangle, if you please."
Quadrangle. 3 yellow squares of light shone above us in the gathering gloom.
"Your 3 birds are all up in their nests," said Holmes, looking up. "Hello, what's that? One of them seems restless enough."
It was Indian, whose dark silhouette appeared suddenly upon his blind. He was pacing swiftly up and down his room.
"I should like to have a peep at such of them,"
said Holmes.
"Is it possible?"
"No difficulty in the world," Holmes answered. "This set of rooms is quite the oldest in the college, and it is not unusual for visitors to go over them. Come along, and I will personally conduct you."
"Now names, please," said Holmes as they reached Griller's store.
A tall, flaxen-haired, slim young fellow opened it, and made us welcome when he understood our errand. There were really curious pieces of medieval domestic architecture within.
Holmes was so charmed with one of them that he insisted on drawing it with his notebook, broke his pencil, and had to borrow one from our host, and finally borrowed a knife to sharpen his own. The curious accident happened to him in the other rooms of both the Indian, the silent little hook-nosed fellow who eyed us askance with his obviously glad when Holmes's architectural studies had come to an end. I could not see that in either case Holmes had come upon a clue for which he was searching. I wondered at the third did our visit prove abortive. The outer door would not open to a knock, and nothing more substantial than a torrent of bad language came from behind it. "I don't care who you are, you can go to blazes," roared the angry voice. "Tomorrow's an exam and I won't be drawn by anyone." "A rude fellow," said our guide, flushing with anger as he withdrew down the stair. Of course he did not realize that it was I who was knocking, but nonetheless his conduct was very uncourteous, and indeed, under the circumstances, rather suspicious. Holmes's response was a curious one. "Can you tell me his exact height?" he asked. "Really, Mr. Holmes, I cannot undertake to say. He's taller than the Italian, not so tall as Gilchrist. Suppose 5'6" would be about it." "That is very important," said Holmes. "And now, Mrs. Holmes, I wish you a good night." Our guide cried aloud at his astonishment and dismay. "Good gracious, Mr. Holmes, you're not going to leave me in this abrupt fashion. You don't seem to realize the position. Tomorrow is the examination, and I must make some definite action tonight. I cannot allow the examination to be held and one of the papers has been tampered with. The situation must be faced." "You must leave it as it is. I shall drop round to early tomorrow morning and chat the matter over. It is possible that I may be in position when to indicate some course of action. Meanwhile, you change nothing. Nothing at all." "Very good, Mr. Holmes." "You can be perfectly at ease in your mind. We shall certainly find some way to put you out of your difficulties. I will take the black clay with me, and also the pencil cuttings. Goodbye." When we were out in the darkness of the quadrangle, we again looked up at the windows. The Indian still paced his room. The others were invisible. "Well, Watson, what do you think of it?" Holmes asked as we came out into the main street. "Quite a little parlor game, sort of a 3-card trick, is it not? And there are your 3 men. It must be one of them. Take your choice. Which is yours?" "The foulmost fellow at the top. He is the one with the worst record, and yet the Indian was a sly fellow also. Why should he be pacing in his room all the time?" "There's nothing in that. Many men do that in their heart when they're trying to learn anything by heart." "He looked at us in a queer way." "So would you if a flock of strangers came in on you when you were preparing for an examination the next day, and every moment was of value. No, I see nothing in that. Pencils, too, and knives. All was satisfactory. But that fellow does puzzle me." "Who?" "Why, Bannister, the servant. What's his game in this matter?" "He impressed me as being a perfectly honest man." "So he did me. That's the puzzling part. Why should a perfectly honest man... Well, there's this large stationer's. We shall begin our researches there." There were only 4 stationers of any consequence in the town, and at each Holmes produced his pencil chips and bid high for duplicates. All were agreed that one could be ordered, but that it was not unusual size of pencil that was seldom kept in stock. My friend did not appear to be depressed by his failure, but shrugged his shoulders in half-humorous resignation. "Not good, my dear Watson. This, the best and only final clue, has run to nothing. But indeed, I have little doubt that we can build up a significant case without it. By Jove, my dear fellow, it is nearly 9,
and the landlady dabbled of green peas at 7:30. What with your eternal tobacco, Watson, and your irregularity of meals, I expect that you should get a notice to quit, and that I shall share your downfall. Not, however, before we have solved the problem of this nervous tutor, the careless servant, and the 3 enterprising students.
Holmes made no further allusion to the matter of the day, though he sat lost in thought for a long time after our belated dinner. At 8 in the morning he came into my room just as I finished my toilet.
"Well, Watson," he said, "it is time that we went down to St. Luke's. Can you do without breakfast?"
"Certainly."
Soames will be in a dreadful fidget until we are able to tell him something positive.
"Have you anything positive to tell him?"
"I think so."
"You formed a conclusion?"
"Yes, my dear Watson, I have solved the mystery."
"But what fresh evidence could you got?"
"Aha! It is not for nothing that I have turned myself out of bed at this untimely hour of 6. I have put in 2 hours' hard work and covered at least 5 miles, with something to show for it. Look at that."
He held out his hand. On the palm were 3 little pyramids of black, doughy clay. "Why, Holmes, you had only 2 yesterday."
"And 1 more this morning. It is a fair argument that whatever number 3 came from is also the source of number 1 and 2, eh, Watson? Well, come along and put friend Soames out of his pain."
"The unfortunate tutor was certainly in a state of pitiable agitation when we found him in his chambers. In a few hours examinations would commence, and he was still in the dilemma between making the facts public and allowing the culprit to compete for the valuable scholarship. He could hardly stand still, so great was his mental agitation, and he ran towards Holmes with 2 eager hands outstretched."
"Thank heaven you 2 have come. I feared that you had given up in despair. What am I to do? Shall the examination proceed?" "Yes, let it proceed by all means. But this rascal shall not compete." "You know him?" "I think so. If this matter is not to become public, we must give ourselves certain powers, and resolve ourselves into a small private court-martial. You there, if you please, Soames. Watson, you here. I'll take the armchair in the middle. I think that we are now sufficiently imposing to strike terror into the guilty beast. Kindly ring the bell."
Bannister entered and shrunk back in evident surprise and fear of our judicial appearance.
"You will kindly close the door," said Holmes. "Now, Bannister, you will please tell us the truth about yesterday's incidents."
The man turned white to his roots of his hair. "I've told you everything, sir."
"Nothing to add?"
"Nothing at all, sir."
"Well, then, I must make some suggestions to you. When you sat down in that chair yesterday, did you do so in order to conceal some object which you would have shown to someone who had been in the room?"
Bannister's face turned ghastly. "No, sir, certainly not."
"It was only a suggestion," said Holmes suavely. "I frankly admit that I am unable to prove it, but it seems probable enough that since the movement that Mrs. Sloane's back was turned, you released the man who was hiding in the bedroom."
Bannister licked his dry lips. "There was no man, sir."
"Ah, that's a pity, Bannister. Up to now you may have spoken the truth, but now I know that you have lied."
The man's face set in sullen defiance.
"There was no man, sir." Come, Bannister.
"No, sir, there was no one."
"In that case, you can give us no further information. Would you please remain in the room? Stand over there by the bedroom door. Now, Soames, I'm going to ask you to have the great kindness to go up to the room of the young Gilchrist and ask him to step down into yours."
An instant later the tutor returned, bringing with him the student.
He was a fine figure of a man, tall, lithe, agile, with a springy step and a pleasant open face. His troubled eyes glanced at each of us and finally rested with an expression of blank dismay upon Bannister in the far corner. "Just close the door," said Holmes. "Now, Mr. Gilchrist, we're all quite alone here, and no one needs ever know one word of what passes between us. We can perfectly be frank with each other. We want to know, Mr. Gilchrist, how you, an honorable man, came to commit such an action as that of yesterday." The unfortunate young man staggered back and cast a full look of horror and reproach at Bannister. "No, Mr. Gilchrist, sir, I never said a word, never one word," cried the servant. "No, but you have now," said Holmes. "Now, sir, you must see that after Bannister's words your position is hopeless, and that your only chance lies in frank confession." For a moment Gilchrist was upraised and tried to control his writhing features. The next he had thrown himself on his knees before the table, and burying his face in his hands, he had burst into a storm of passionate sobbing. Come, said Holmes kindly. "It is human to err, and at least no one can accuse you of being a callous criminal. Perhaps it would be easier for you if I were to tell Mrs. Holmes what occurred, and you can check me whether I am wrong. Shall I do so?" Well, don't trouble to answer. Listen, and see that I can do you no injustice. From the moment, Mr. Soames, that you said to me that no one, not even Bannister, could have told that the papers were in your room, the case began to take a definite shape in my mind. The printer could, of course, be dismissed. He could examine the papers in his own office. The Indian I also thought nothing of. If the proofs were in the roll, he would not possibly know what they were. On the other hand, it seemed an unthinkable coincidence that a man should dare to enter a room that, by chance, on that very day, the papers were on the table. I dismissed that. The man who entered knew that the papers were there. And how did I know? When I approached your room, I examined the window. You amused me by supposing that I was contemplating the possibility of someone having, in broad daylight, under the eyes of all the opposite rooms, forced himself through it. Such an idea was absurd. I was measuring how tall a man would need to be in order to see, as he passed, what papers were on the central table. I am 6 feet high, and I could do it with effort. No one less than that would have had a chance. Already, you see, I had reason to think that if one of your 3 students was a man of unusual height, he was the most worth watching of the 3. I entered, and I took you into my confidence as to the suggestion of the side table. Of the center table, I made nothing until your description of Gilchrist, who you mentioned that he was a long-distance jumper. Then the whole thing came to me in an instant, and I only needed certain corroborative proofs, which I speedily obtained. What happened was this. The young fellow was employed his afternoon and got to the athletic grounds, where he had been practicing the jump. He returned carrying his jumping shoes, which were provided, as you are well aware, with several sharp spikes. As he passed your window, he saw, by means of his great height, these proofs upon your table, and conjectured what they were. No harm would have been done had it not been for that he passed your door and perceived the key, which he had been left by your careless servant. A sudden impulse came over him to enter and see if those were indeed the proofs. It was not a dangerous exploit, for he could always pretend that he had simply looked in and asked a question. Well, when he saw the proofs that they were indeed, it was then he yielded to temptation. He put his shoes on the table. It was that you put the chair near the window. "Gloves," said the young man. Holmes looked triumphantly at Bannister. He put his gloves on the chair. and then he took these proofs, sheet by sheet, to copy them. He thought the tutor must return by the main gate, and that he would see him. As we know, he came by the side gate. Suddenly he heard him at the very door, and there was no possible escape. He forgot his gloves, but he caught up his shoes and darted out of the bedroom. You observe that the scratch on the table is right with one on the door. It deepens in the direction of the bedroom door. That in itself is enough to show that the shoe had been drawn in that direction from the culprit had then taken refuge. The earth around the spike had been left on the table, and a second sample was loosened and fell to the bedroom. I may add that I walked into the athletic grounds this morning and saw the tenacious black clay is used in the jumping pit, and carried away some specimen of it, together with some of the fine tan and sawdust that is strewn over to prevent the athlete from slipping. Have I told the truth, Mr. Gilchrist?
The student had drawn himself for it.
Yes, it's true, he said.
Good heavens! Have you nothing to add? Cried Soames.
Yes, sir, I have. But the shock of this disgraceful exposure has bewildered me. I have a letter here, Mr. Soames, which I wrote you early this morning in the middle of a restless night. It was because I knew that my sin had found me out. Here it is, sir. You will see that I have said, I have determined not to go in for the examination. I have been offered a commission at the Rhodesian police, and I am going to South Africa at once.
I am indeed pleased to hear that you did not intend to profit from your unfair advantage, said Holmes. But why did you change your purpose? Gilchrist pointed to Bannister.
There's the man who set me on the right path, said he.
Come now, Bannister, said Holmes.
It will be clear to you from what I have said that you not only could have let this young man out since you left the room, and must have locked the door when you went out. As to his escaping by that window, it was incredible. Can you not clear up the last point in this mystery, and tell us the reasons for your actions?
It was simple enough, if you only had known. But with all your cleverness, it was impossible that you could know. Time was, I was the butler of old Sir Jabez Gilchrist, the gentleman's father. When he was ruined, I came to the college as a servant, but I never forgot my old employer because he was down in the world. I watched the sun all I could for the sake of the old days. Well, sir, when I came into the room yesterday when the alarm was given, the very thing I saw was Mr. Gilchrist's tan gloves lying on the chair. I knew those gloves well, and I understood their message. If Mr. Soames saw them, the game was up. I flopped down into that chair, and nothing could budge me until Mr. Soames went out for you. Then out came my poor young master, whom I had handed on my knees and confessed it was all me. It wasn't natural, sir, that I should save him. Wasn't it also natural that I should try to speak to him as his dead father would have done, and make him understand that he could not profit by such a deed? Could you blame me, sir?
No, indeed, said Holmes, heartily springing to his feet. Well, Soames, I think we've cleared up your little problem, and our breakfast awaits us at home. Come, Watson, as to you, sir, I trust that the bright future awaits in Rhodesia. For once you have fallen low, let us see in the future how high you shall rise.